Hi, and welcome on this knowledge clip on focus group discussions. Maybe you are new to doing focus groups, or you would just like to refresh your memories. In this video, I will talk about some essentials when considering and planning focus group discussions. My name is Derwin Lynch, and I work at the Athena Institute of the Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam. Both my research and my teaching incorporates focus group discussions. This is part one of a series of, yeah, on focus group discussions. And in this video, I will talk about the essentials, the essential characteristics of focus groups. So the size, their structure, but also the setting in which they take place. Some important considerations with regards to planning focus groups. So selecting your participants, but also the venue and the date, for example, are very much to be taken into account. I will discuss the role of the researcher or the researchers involved in conducting, facilitating, but also designing the focus group discussions. And I will finalize by highlighting some general strengths and limitations of focus group discussions. In part two, which is a different video, I will focus on designing effective and creative focus group discussions. Focus groups are a form of group interview. They are not the same as a group interview. In a group interview, the communication is very much between the researcher or the interviewer and the participants individually, and so less between the participants. Um, so it's a kind of like an effective way of extracting the same type of information of different participants. In a focus group discussion, um, you want the participants to actually also interact with each other. So the participants definitely have a common characteristics and they're brought together because of that. But you're mostly, as a researcher, busy facilitating the discussion on a particular topic. Um, so the group interaction and the dynamics of the focus group discussion are quite essential. And I would say characteristic, distinguishing them from other forms of group interviews. Within that group interaction, and why is it so beneficial? It allows for a wider range of responses, so more diverse responses, and that's what you aim for in focus groups. You aim for diversity. Another important element here is that it, via the means of focus groups and having people engage with each other, they activate forgotten details by listening to others. And focus groups also help to release inhibitions. Think about talking about a very sensitive topic. So that feeling of belonging and recognition is, yeah, can release inhibitions. The idea of focus groups is to generate a narrative on a focused discussion on a particular topic. So it's quite a controlled interaction where you as a researcher are trying to, steer and facilitate that discussion. What purposes do focus groups serve? So first of all, focus groups, they are a qualitative method. And so they intend to explore and understand a certain topic more in depth. The data that you the data that focus groups produce will give you insight into opinions, needs, values, and beliefs expressed by the participants, both individually and collectively with each other. So, with this purpose in mind, focus groups can really help with decision making. So, because more alternatives, for example, are explored, but you can also find out where the collective priorities lie. They can help with guiding intervention development, but also program development or innovation development, just to make sure that all the needs and desires are taken into account. They can also provide insight into organizational concerns and issues because they really tap into the experiential and the embodied knowledge of the participants. And focus groups can also be used with other research methods as a form of triangulation, or maybe to explore more in depth the outcomes of a certain survey you did before. What are some of the main characteristics of focus groups? I will touch upon a few. First, the venue, which is very important to have a very neutral and socially acceptable venue for your participants. It's important to create a conversational environment and to have that possibility. As the conversational aspect is characteristic of a focus group, you should think about, will my participants sit in a U shape or a circular forum? Will they have tables or not? How will that enhance or obstruct the conversational environment? Also think about the setting. So you want a noise-free environment with enough space to talk and to walk if you have certain exercises. Think about the amount of people in your focus group. In general, it's recommended to have between 5 and 12 participants. If you have less participants than that, you don't really have that diversity of ideas. And if you have too many participants, not everybody gets a chance to really speak. Think about the length. Focus groups can be between 2 and 3 hours, sometimes also less, or but not really more than that. And their structure is very open. Although you do have a design, you are open to the particular needs of the participants and the flow of the discussion as it goes. So that's also very characteristic of focus groups. So the atmosphere is very important to have a safe and non-threatening atmosphere. You want people to feel at ease and relaxed to freely express their thoughts and beliefs. So the moderator or the facilitator, as some might call it, he or she has an important role in maintaining this good atmosphere, establishing it and also maintaining it. So then we come to the different activities of the focus group discussion. You want them to be very positive, to contribute to that positive atmosphere, but also constructive. You're open to co-construct the knowledge with the participants and allow them to co-construct together. And in that way, it's very creative. So part two of this knowledge clip on focus group discussions will really focus on the exercises, the activities, the questions that you address in the focus group. On the picture, you can see that a focus group actually can take place in many settings and in many forms. In a restaurant, in a very rural community school, outside under a tree, but also with in a room with maybe also more technological tools to help you, such as a PowerPoint presentation, a Beamer, and a PowerPoint presentation can then be presented to the participants. Also important to think of the participant selection because they make up the majority of the focus group. So the selection criteria of your participants, of course, depends on your research framework. It depends on your study questions and your research objective. You want the focus group to produce data that can help you achieve your research objective. So you do want to carefully think about how you and who you will select as your participants. It's about representativeness. Sometimes you want demographic representation. For example, you want to make sure that you have in your focus group a group that as much as possible represents the Dutch population, for example. But in other cases, you want to have stakeholder representation in your research. You want to talk to patients, you want to talk to doctors, you want to talk maybe to parents or family caregivers. So different stakeholders in your research. In other cases, you want to have cognitive representation. So you want to enrich that diversity of idea. And that can be, for example, including people with different worldviews or people with different um, uh, uh, political parties' views. So it depends, of course, on your particular research. However, you do want participants to have that, that common characteristic, so that they feel connected. And at the same time, you do want participants to feel that they can actually contribute to the topic. So they should know why they are selected. That's one thing. But they should also be communicative and reflexive in the moment to contribute to the task that you're giving them to discuss the topic. So that should also be taken into account when you select your participants. In general, you want the focus group participants in a particular focus group to be a homogeneous group. Like I mentioned before, you want to have that common characteristic that is relevant to the discussion, um, clear to them. They have to know that that's what connects them. And because of this common characteristic, you have this complementary interaction where they mutually learn from each other's experiences, but also co-construct ideas together. However, I can imagine that you're maybe wondering now, but oh, wait a minute, I also want to, in certain cases, critically test certain ideas or to sharpen ideas. So in some cases, you want to have the diversity, um, not necessarily within one focus group, but across a series of focus groups. So you can have multiple homogeneous groups that give you the possibility to explore heterogeneity across all groups once they're all done. For example, one focus group with males and another one with females, or one with parents and the other one with caregivers. So different homogeneous groups. When you think of the participant selection, also think about the comfort of your participant, and maybe also try to engage them in a participatory way in selecting the date and maybe the venue, the location of the focus group discussion. Sometimes taking into account that comfort is very important, certain power plays or cultural aspects, demographics can hamper the group composition. So those need to be taken into account. Discuss these with, of course, your research team. You can make use of a recruitment agency that can recruit your participants for you. But in some cases, you can also make use of the organization you are working with that has maybe warmer bonds with the target group, for example, a patient organization. It's very important to think of the type of knowledge you're tapping to, whether that's experiential knowledge, general common sense knowledge, consumer needs, or end user needs that, yeah, that can help you into the different considerations to take into account when selecting your participants. So something about the general structure. Um, Look at the right hand side. So the focus groups start in most cases, that's also what we try to teach via this method, um, with some sort of broaden divergence of ideas, a brainstorming on different options. So you want people to think about those for themselves and then articulate those, because you have to make explicit what all the diversity of ideas is, not only explicit to you as a researcher but also to the other participants. So always make sure that so to practice the listen, clarifying and summarizing skills that interviewers also do, not only for yourself but also for the other participants. Then after you've diverged a lot, you have to have some sort of systemization. You make categories and connections, cluster things together with the participants. You also use their way of clustering and making connection. And then it's important to converge, because you do want to know where the priorities lie. In focus groups, the aim is not to reach consensus, but to have some general feeling of what this group, this particular focus group, collectively sees as important and what not. That's interesting. So this is the general outline of your focus group. Start broadening up, at making explicit, categorize and systematize, and then converge. As you can imagine, the few things that I've mentioned, the role of the researcher is very important as well to take into account. Um, in particular the moderator or the facilitator. Let's now talk about some moderator skills which are important. The first one, a strong interviewing technique. Yes, the facilitator or the moderator should be able to ask questions in an open manner, very clearly. um, he or she is responsible to provide certain information, but also to receive information, to communicate objectives, be aware as well of where opportunities lie to dig deeper, so probing questions, and also apply analytical and empathic listening at the same time. This person should also have keen observational skills. Look at the group dynamic, who is speaking first, who is leaning a bit back, but also look at the time, keeping track of time while facilitating the group discussion. Yeah, the ability to control and guide a discussion. And that means keeping certain judgments for yourself, maintaining the group focused on the topic. That's your ability to maintain, to guide and control the discussion. The ability to suppress own personal views. Remember that as a facilitator, sometimes you've done 2 or 3 focus groups, you know certain answers, but it's important that every focus group, you give them sufficient time for themselves to co-construct the thoughts, the knowledge. And you have respect for participants. So you actively listen to them. You have concern for comfort when they want to break or not, when they want to pause. You keep your eye contact. So you establish rapport. Important is that your participants feel comfortable. So the attitude of the moderator is a little bit different than of course the skills. Also good to pay attention to a few important things. First one is the accepting attitude. All ideas are important. All ideas are valuable. Um, when you ask a question, always say yes to an answer that you receive or thank you. That accepting attitude helps to make people feel more comfortable and able to contribute more. Active listening. You make a conscious effort to listening. Focus on listening rather than talking. Treat what is said with care. You have respect and empathy, of course, because all participants have a worthy contribution to make, and no participant is more important than the other one. You're culturally sensitive. Think about how you sit, for example. In certain contexts, it's not okay to sit and point with your foot. Think of how you dress, how you talk. Think also how you are perceived if you're from a donor organization. Are you a rich person? Are you a Western researcher? Are you an insider of the organization or not? Think of your language. Sometimes you need to have a moderator or an interpreter with you. It's good to learn the 20 most important words of your research so that you can, you know, uh, uh, yeah, so that you can easily talk between the different uh, can have a good conversation on your research within a particular context. And you're open and flexible to, yeah, the needs of the participants. There are other roles as well, luckily. For example, you also have a secretary that keeps notes. The secretary records notes and quotes, captures yeah, certain other important information, but also is handy to operate the audio and the video recording. You have the monitor or observer who can look at individual behavior, but also check if the spacing area is okay for the participants, and can assist and help with many other different tasks. And you also have the interpreter, and I would recommend to work from the beginning with the interpreter if you are in a setting where it's better to have the focus group in a different language than you speak. It's always good to have the focus group in the native language of the participants, but engage the interpreter in designing the session, selecting participants, in facilitating, but also in the reflection and the analysis, transcribing of the focus group discussion. Just to summarize a few important strengths of focus group discussions, which can help you when you are considering them, making a choice. So focus group are co-constructive. They co-produce knowledge with the participants among themselves. New knowledge is co-produced, but also old knowledge is consolidated, and this is rich data. They provide an opportunity to derive a collective perspective. Remember, focus groups don't aim to reach consensus, but a collective perspective is sometimes a step of analysis that you would have had to make if you had individual interviews. Now you can get it from the participants. Direct interaction is observable, so you can immediately see how certain concepts, ideas, priorities are validated by the group, and you can also start your analysis immediately after the focus group. Focus groups can be used in a wide area of applications, topics, and issues. Controversial topics, very complex topics, but also sensitive issues. They can empower participants. Think of participants that are normally not so much engaged in the topic or are not working in the topic in a professional way. It can help them, to structure certain point views, and can help them empower them further. And all can be included: children, people who are illiterate, culturally and linguistically diverse people, elderly, patients. Different people can be included, and they're very quick and cheap focus groups. But there are also some limitations that you should consider. First of all, there can be confidentiality issues. Think about certain sensitive think about the appropriateness of the topic if you actually want your participants to elaborate on it in a group setting. In some cases, some sensitive topics, a group setting is still not really ideal. They can be difficult to steer, control, and monitor. This depends on the experience and the effectiveness of the facilitator. Sometimes you have conflicts. So think about power plays within a focus group or very dominant participants. They can be overwhelming to analyze. You can start analyzing immediately. But a focus group of 3 hours, when you transcribe it, it can be easily about 60 to 70 pages in Word. And if you have multiple focus groups, that's overwhelming to analyze, so requires proper attention. It's a small sample size, so be aware that your findings are not representative of a larger population. You can always explore that with a questionnaire survey afterwards, but be aware that your sample size is a small group. It's a snapshot. And that leads me to my final limitation or critique point of discussion, which is very relevant nowadays in the literature. Are we creating, for example, the public with a focus group? We are mimicking a particular situation, scenario, have them discuss together. Are we creating the public? I explored this critique a bit more in my recent article, for which I invite you to read, Constructing the Public and Roadmapping the Transition to a Bioeconomy. And by inviting you to my own article, I also invite you to see and read other articles on focus group discussions. Explore for yourself how others have used the focus groups in their research. Here you can see a collection of some recent articles that I found interesting. One is, for example, on making focus groups more inclusive. Another one on doing online focus groups, and one on how deciding how many focus groups are enough. So feel free to check these out if you're interested. This is the end of part 1 of this series on focus group discussions. If you want to learn more about designing creative and effective focus groups, please check out part 2 of the series on focus group discussions afterwards. Goodbye.